that they've incorporated digital sculpting and digital lighting look development tools in the concept art process that's just phenomenal. It's really, really nice to work with. I might need to do a monitor switch sort of partway through this, but kind of bear with me, right? So I'm going to bring the Blender UI over here to my broadcast monitor. So it's got an old project open in the background, but you can see that Blender supports a number of different workflows right from the beginning. So you open Blender and you get this welcome window, and you can say, look, I want you to show me the general UI, the UI specific for 2D animation, sculpting, or visual effects or video editing, and a number of other ones. Let's pop open the general one so we can take a look at what's going on inside the general window. So I'm going to come up to here and say File, New, File, New. All right, that's interesting. It's not letting me do a new file. So my Blender compadres out here, how do I start a new file? Okay, so file, new. What is happening? A new general file. And it's not giving me a blank new project. That's really kind of interesting. All right. So let's, I'm super loath to just go in there and delete everything. Let's see if we can launch this again. Yeah, so Joe, it's done that to you before, eh? Okay, cool. This could be a really good video in terms of how to field test Blender and see how user-friendly it is for 3D artists. It doesn't make any sense to me. So there's your open if you want to open a specific file. Here are your recent files. I want a new file. Open the default file. Doesn't save the current file. Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a bug. I think it's a bug. It's probably a bug. All right, so let's pop into what would normally be a, let's go to the general modeling tab and see if we get this, right? Okay, so I've just gone into the regular modeling tab, and what I'll probably do is, let's take a look at this guy, and then we'll just delete it, right? Get rid of this guy. So I'm not sure what the default groups are that this video, what Blender users say. Okay, so yeah, one caveat again is that when you're dealing with Blender, remember it's open source software. It's reached an incredible stage of stability that you can do really good professional work inside of it, but it's still open source. So open source means that not only is the software available for you to use, it's available for other people to contribute to, and you are effectively the beta testers at the same time as you are the users, right? So invariably, you will run into bugs. Sorry, my audio keeps cutting out. Okay, looks like I'm having some difficulty. Let's close down Excel for a second here. So the audio, I'm getting 26% dropped frames as well inside of Streamlabs. So that's causing a little bit of an issue. The other thing I keep forgetting that I need to get up and running is my closed caption. So let me get that going on. Okay. So at the very least, we should have some closed captioning going on. And I'm just going to double check on my Twitch stream because I had this closed captioning web page and connection open, and it said I was connected and it was translating, but I checked my stream last night and it wasn't on there. So I just want to double check that it's happening. So let's see. Bottom line, Twitch needs to get. Yeah, it's not connecting to my Twitch. Hang on. Let's see. Convert speech to display closed caption as a box on the right side of the screen. No, okay, there it is. So I see it happening here. Speech display cabinets Argos. That's just crazy. Okay, well, hopefully that'll be good. All right. So it looks to be working. All right. So back to the questions. So Blender is blending your RAM. Yeah, more than likely. I'm just trying to free things up here. So let's get out of Photoshop. That's a huge file. So that's probably eating up CPU. So let's see if we can free up a little bit of CPU. Okay, so whilst that's going on, now I cannot remember what Blender creates on the fly, but let's have a look. So we've got something very, very similar to the outliner already open for us here. So very similar to Maya in that respect. Now I've opened up the modeling viewport because this one I feel is the most similar to the way Maya is structured. And here we can bring in objects and all kinds of other stuff. So I believe when you open Blender, you get a default camera and a light, right? And I've created a scene collection here, just called DOP, right? So the scene collection, or the collection rather, for me is very much like a group node. I know it's got a few more features that make it better than the group node in terms of stuff that you get into later on when you're doing video editing and pre-visualization. But for me, it's a convenient way of grouping stuff. So there's my DOP sort of area, and I can, turn things on and off inside here. Right? So I'm going to turn off the camera and the light. Now I'm navigating by middle mouse button scrolling, and it's all middle mouse button. So to vary how you navigate around, it's the shift will pan, middle mouse button will rotate, and control, middle mouse button will zoom in and out. Right? So the right-hand side, it's different from sort of an attribute editor kind of thing. This reminds me very much of 3D Studio Max in terms of the way it's structured with its modifier stack and all that kind of stuff. But if any of you would have dabbled with 3D Studio Max, will recognize that a lot of the tool sets are organized in a menu set very similar to this. So we've got our active scene, and then we've got just our render settings, which we would normally access up here. We have our sort of image resolution, and what do we got here? That's our view layer properties, and we've got our scene properties. This is where we'll be spending a bit of time in. And then we've got our surface properties, which deal with, which we'll be taking a look at in terms of materials and shaders and things like that. And what was this one again? Texture properties. Okay, that's cool, right? Okay, so I'm going to just come in here and I'm going to add a mesh, right? So I'm going to bring in a sphere, not a plane. Oh, where cube, circle, oh, sorry, UV sphere. Yeah, let's bring in a UV sphere. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there was something that was really kind of interesting about the way you move these guys around. Oh man, this is where you're like, you end up, when you drive into a new piece of software, you're like, I'm missing a lot of very, very simple things that I don't know I use on a daily basis, like grid snap, right? So it's kind of like, oh, okay, where's my grid snap? I have no idea, right? But I wanted to show you guys the geometry level because this is where you might want to bring in a variety of different objects to bring into the sculpting context. So what you might want to do is yeah, just block out your character really roughly inside of here. But for today, I'm just going to take this guy and let's move over to our sculpting area. And we can see that that object is there as well. But it's being processed differently inside of this context, in that when we're in the modeling context, it's purely geometry. But when we're going to sculpting, it's ready to kind of convert this into voxels and do all kinds of operations that will allow you to sculpt. So the sculpting sort of UI and tool set is very, very similar to Mudbox. Right from the color of the digital clay to the way the tool set icons are, right? So these are the tools that will allow us to manipulate this like it was clay, right? So this is quite a cool place to kind of sit and work out what you might want to do sculpturally, right? So there's a couple of things that I need sort of straight off the bat. I'm going to come over here and let's see if we can find brush settings for, it'll likely be under stroke. What I need to do is find where I can do the mirroring. There we go. So symmetry. So if we're taking a look at our axes, and our view axes is going to be down the x-axis. Let's actually. So I'm going to turn on symmetry on the x-axis. Hey guys, do you know how to turn on symmetry? Okay, no, I'm starting to rethink this because I thought I could jump in and muscle memory would kick in and I'd start to sort of remember how I navigated around inside of Blender to do the grease pencil stuff, top right. But this is going to be too much like Hunt and Peck. So I'm just thinking here. I'm going to backpedal. Okay, guys? The butterfly thing. The butterfly. No, this is too complicated. It's just going to be like Hunt and Peck. So what I'll probably do is I'll take this with me and I'll work on a concept later on tonight, just so I get a little bit more familiar with it. And then we'll jump back in, okay? I'm going to backpedal. No! Sorry, I got to backpedal because it's just going to be a nightmare trying to walk through this, right? So what I'm going to do instead is to give you guys a brief introduction to ZBrush, right? Have any of you guys ever heard of ZBrush? See, I'm backpedaling it to my comfort zone here, right? Because I've been using ZBrush for a long time. I've heard of it. Okay, so with ZBrush, let's take a look at it, right? So I'm going to fire it up. And we'll talk a little bit about it. I wanted to show you guys Blender's sculpting functionality because it's really good. But perhaps what I'll do is I'll intro ZBrush to you guys, and then we'll pick up the digital sculpting. See, later on tonight, I might be able to do something a little bit later on tonight, right? Which I will stream, right? So you can access the stream and it'll all be good. Okay, so there are a few things that I will need to talk about in terms of ZBrush and how it works, right? So ZBrush is a digital sculpting application. It is like the de facto standard for digital sculpting, right? Now, when ZBrush came out, there were two different types of sculpting packages available: Mudbox and ZBrush. I remember working with one of the creators of Mudbox, and I was probably one of the very first guinea pigs for kind of using Mudbox and trying to figure it out. And it was a fairly good sort of digital sculpting tool. But ZBrush came out, and it was developed, I think, as an in-house tool at Weta, I think. Or I don't know if Weta purchased it and it was developed further there, right? Now, the difference between the two is that ZBrush began its incarnation as an in-house production tool. So what does that mean? It means it doesn't follow the basic Windows interface. There's no file open close here. There's no edit set preferences here, right? It doesn't follow the typical window convention. Whereas Mudbox was developed using the sort of the framework that Windows applications use. And this is an example of the framework. So you get file in the upper left-hand corner, et cetera, and you got these windows, these little icons, and all that stuff exists as pre-existing pieces of code that the developers of Mudbox used to construct their UI. And they built very, very simple tools, right? Mudbox, ZBrush, on the other hand, was built purely as a texturing tool with artists in mind, right? So when an artist drops in to sort of a concept creation application, the first thing that concerns them are their alphas and their brushes, right? And then selecting colors. So that's why you have this strange UI setup, right? You pop in there, you go alpha, brush, color. Now, I keep saying that ZBrush started as a texturing tool, right? And I'll explain a little bit about that in terms of the technology that's going on. And to do this, I'll need to kind of bring up Photoshop again, which may kind of hamper us a little bit in terms of our frame rate. Not too many buttons on the screen at once. Yeah. That is true. It does take a little bit of getting used to. Now, while Photoshop is firing up, let me explain to you Pixologic's ethos for its development of ZBrush. They place the artist's experience first and foremost. They don't care about things like UI conventions or anything like that. So in a lot of ways, they've reinvented how we navigate inside of 3D software, and this confuses a lot of first-time artists, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And I'll talk a little bit, whilst I'm getting Photoshop ready, I'll talk a little bit about how digital sculpting was made possible, right? So I'm going to pop over into the Lightbox and just grab a real quick sample project. Where's our clown guy? Where'd he go? 3D printing, Z-spheres. Where is he now? Did they take our clown guy out? Maybe. Would be in there. Let's check in here. Meshes. No, it's not in there. Let's go back. Ta-da. Where are you? I don't know if he'd be in there as just a clown. Oh, that's okay. I'll just grab anything. Right? Let's bring our soldier guy in. Oh, there he is. Earthquake. Okay, so let's take a look at this guy, right? So classically, when you're modeling inside of Maya, you've got a little bit of a poly count limitation, right? So if you start modeling, say, 1 million polygons, Maya will start to chug and slow down. The old blue screen limit that I was familiar with way back in 2008 was about 4 million polys, right? So you get to 4 million polys, and then suddenly Maya would crap out on you. Yeah, it's not a clown. Sorry, I don't know why I thought it was a clown. I think the crash out time for Maya, I think you can get probably 10 million polys on the screen before it crashes on you, right? So you can't really do classic digital sculpting inside of Maya per se. Although they're working on it. They're trying to incorporate sculpting tools. I think they're absorbing a lot of Mudbox's tool set inside Maya's main UI. ZBrush, on the other hand, you can model 3 million, 4 million, 20 million, 100 million, right? 1 billion polys, right? You can model a ridiculous amount of polygons. So right now you're looking at sort of 3 million polys and no latency, right? Look how responsive that is, right? It's a crazy, crazy amount, right? Well, what makes digital sculpting possible is actually advancements in the graphics adapter industry, right? And I'm being really kind of loose about this, just giving you guys a little bit of an overview, right? Because when original 3D packages were developed, they relied heavily on a vertex processing pipeline. So every vertex was calculated, all the color information associated with every vertex was calculated. When the graphics adapter was drawing stuff on the screen, it would store the vertex transforms, and then it would use those with a draw call and then draw on the screen, right? So along come, I believe it was either the Matrox Millennium guys or the 3D Voodoo Effects guys, and they developed some of the first graphics adapters that started to take advantage of a pixel shader pipeline. So what does that mean? It means that a lot of the graphics engineers figured out, well, we're not really drawing vertices and polygons on the screen. We're drawing pixels, right? We're drawing pixels across. So pixels are a lot quicker to draw because it's just an XY calculation. Once we know the color of that pixel, we just draw what we need on the screen. So we don't have to do all this CG, this 3D transforms that we do on vertices. We can just process this with pixels, right? So what that means is that you can get a greater amount of detail in what's called screen space, or just the two-dimensional screen space, than you could by trying to calculate 3D volumes, right? So that's like a really super quick overview, and I'll talk a little bit more about how ZBrush utilizes that, right? So let's take a look at how that technology is working here, right? So if you take a look at, whoops, me rotating this guy, right? Once I rotate this guy, you can see it's changing, right? Because what's happening is, as I'm rotating the camera, the software is figuring out the vertex positions in 3D space. So it shows me a less detailed version of the model, right? Then when I let go, now it's showing me what that looks like as pixels. So it's sort of faking it by swapping from vertices to pixels, right? And you can see that as I can maneuver around, you'll lose the texture resolution as I'm rotating, right? I mean, that's not exactly what's happening in the background, but it sort of gives you an idea of how technology can be utilized with outside of the box thinking to be able to display more polygons on the screen for us, right? So, how many polygons do you think ZBrush can handle using this tech? Using this way of interacting with digital sculpture? Well, let's find out, right? So, I'm going to grab at least the body of this character, right? And I'm going to subdivide it, right? So we're now at 4.966 million polys. Subdividing again. right? We're at 19 million polys, 20 million polys, almost no lag. Now we can go upwards of 100 million polys, but we'll have to do something else to do that, right? Actually, I'm going to stop there. I don't want to introduce you guys to the high resolution, or the geometry HD functionality just yet. So I want you guys to wrap your heads around the fact that we're rotating vertices and we're looking at pixels, kind of. So why is this important? Well, let's take a look at Photoshop, right? And let me create a new canvas, just something small. Come on. There you go. Okay, so if I come in here and with my brush tool, what color I got, right? I draw something like this, right? Obviously pixels, right? If I come in here and I go to, let's see, emboss, right? Right? So suddenly I've got a 3D line, right? Right? It's a 3D object. Is it? Is that a 3D line? Is that geometry? No, what is it? How is that illusion created? It's just pixel color. Yes, it's just pixel color. This is important. I know it's incredibly pedantic, but it's important for two reasons, right? Number one, that's the heart of how ZBrush does its thing. To a very, very simplified degree, that's what ZBrush is doing. Secondly, it's the secret to what all renderers do, right? What are renderers trying to do? Right? What do renderers do? What does Arnold do when it does a render? What does, when you set Maya to Maya software render? If you look at Unreal Engine and you're looking at the real-time renderer, what's the renderer trying to do? I'll get to exporting and retopo and all that kind of stuff in a minute. And yes, there's 3 different ways of retopologizing inside of ZBrush that are all really, really, really good. What is a renderer trying to do? You guys know? A renderer calculates your textures, calculates your light, calculates animation data, calculates a whole boatload of different things. If you've got global illumination turned on, it calculates light bounces in an environment, all to what end? All to figure out what color to make that pixel. That's all a renderer does. It cranks away on a massive, enormous amount of data to figure out what a single pixel looks like. And then draws a whole bunch of them every frame, right? Remembering that 3D doesn't actually exist. Everything ends up in screen space as pixels, right? To me, that's a fairly important concept. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about how ZBrush is kind of structured, right? So to do that, I'm going to do some mouse drawing. It's okay. We don't need anything too complicated. Not for this. Should be able to handle it with some basic mouse drawing, right? So let's say we've got our canvas, right? Now this is how ZBrush kind of started, right? It started off as a texturing tool. So let's pretend we've got a camera up here looking down, and I've laid the screen down flat just so I can talk about a few different things. And here's a human eye. Woo. Right? So this was our 2D canvas, right? So ZBrush allowed artists to do their concept work on the 2D canvas, whatever they wanted to draw, right? So a lot of the engineers discovered that they can create the illusion building on that pixel manipulation I just showed you in Photoshop, right? So they're like, you know what? We can create the illusion of a 3D object, right? This is supposed to be a sphere. That's awful, right? Right? So we can create the illusion of a 3D object by the way we color the pixels, and we can make it look like it's raised from the surface, just like that bevel tool, right? And this is the, whoops, this is the camera's frustum. So what the engineers at Pixelogic developed from the 2D plane that concept artists used, they developed a, what's called a 2.5D, right? Kind of 3D, sort of, not really, right? And it's not really 3D because these objects are stuck on the canvas, right? So they're attached to the canvas. This whole area is known as the document, right? Oh God, I don't want to spell that. Let's go in here. Oh, come on, I just want a text tool. I just want a text, there you go. Oh, jeez. Right. Oh, Christ. Okay, I'm just going to pop back down here, use the brush, right? So this is our document space, right? 2.5D document space, right? So, not like Grease Pencil, not like Grease Pencil. Grease Pencil is its interesting, unique thing. It's built on planar projections, which I'll talk a little bit about. It's really good planar projections. Okay, so one of the things that another development that the engineers came up with is this sudden ability to lift those pixels up off the canvas right? Using the vertex calculations, they can bring it in like this. Ooh, it's really super laggy, right? And now we suddenly have our 3D context or 3D space, right? Now, what they did with ZBrush is they left all of these spaces there together inside of ZBrush. So you're looking at all of them at once. And this sometimes leads to a little bit of confusion. So let's take a look at what I mean in terms of ZBrush, right? So let's take this off to one side. Let's get rid of our guy here. Switch. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go into my geometry objects and I'm going to create a sphere. I'll talk a little bit about how I did that in a second, right? So, actually, I'll walk you through it. Actually, it might be a little bit better if I describe my process. I mean, we're still early days in terms of ZBrush. So ZBrush, I want to create a sphere straight away, just to demonstrate some of the principles I talked about in terms of the 2D space, 2.5D space, and 3D space, right? So, ZBrush has come up with what I think is a better version of Maya's Hotbox, and that's also attached to the spacebar. I call it a better version of Maya's Hotbox because it's graphical. Now, the Pixelogic guys know that artists prefer graphical, simple UI, and we do, right? And so this is why I enjoyed dropping into ZBrush. It's such a comfortable environment. Now, the Hotbox is built of everything that you have in the UI, right? So I've got here my color picker, right? That's there. I've got my gradient choices here, and they're connected. So when you see I hover over the gradient, it lights up over here. I can click switch color. I've got my 3D objects located in here, right? And I'll talk about all these other ones later. But I can change my brush size immediately here, and the focal shift, and the intensity, right? And we'll talk a little bit about all of these tools in a second. I've got my move, scale, rotates here. Everything's there in my little hotbox, right? Now the hotbox in ZBrush is meant for you as an artist to grab the tools that you need. It's not like Maya's Hotbox that opens up other windows, right? So I'm gonna come in here. The very top icon in the hotbox allows me to quick pick items, which I don't generally use. And I've got my 3D meshes up here and my 2.5D brushes down here. And I'll explain these brushes later. Now, notice the color coding. The brushes and tools that are brightly colored, that have more than 2 colors, generally refer to a 2D or 2.5D a tool, right, for that kind of workspace. Tools that are grayscale, or maybe with 2 tones of grayscale, generally refer to 3D sculpting brushes, right? So I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna grab a sphere. Now I've selected the sphere, I'm gonna draw it on my canvas, right? So I left click and drag and I've drawn it, right? Can I rotate around it? No. Can I do anything with it? No. And then I'm drawing again, and it's drawing a whole bunch of these. This is the #1 thing that you guys will run into using ZBrush for the first time. I don't know how many people are just like, Al, I don't know what's going on. Man, it's just, I'm trying to create a 3D sphere and it's doing this, right? So here, let's bring back Photoshop real quick here. Wow, that's some crazy lag. You are, when you're drawing spheres over and over and over again, let me just select another color here. You are working in this space. Your spheres are stuck to the canvas. It's 2.5D artwork that you're generating, right? So I'm going to come back into ZBrush. Now I'm going to go into edit mode. Now I think they should rename this. They should rename it 3D mode, but it's edit object, right? So when I click this, edit object, and now, holy crap. I've got a 3D sphere. That's exactly what I want, right? Let me paint on it. Let me actually come over here. And I'm just going to go quick color fill object with white. So I want to come over here with the red. I can just really quickly, and make that a Polymesh 3D real quick. I'll explain what I'm doing in a second. I just want to set this up quick so I can just draw on it, right? Okay, so now you can see what's going on when I rotate it and move it around, right? It's like, yeah, okay, so what's going on there, right? I mean, there's all this junk in the background. What did I just do when I hit the edit key, right? Well, when I hit the edit key, I took the last sphere that I drew and popped it into 3D space. But my canvas with a 2.5D sphere stuck to it is still in the background. My document is still in the background, right? So I want to get rid of it. I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at my 3D object, my 2.5D objects, and my 2D object. All of it at once. Now this is, again, a big area of confusion for somebody dropping into ZBrush for the very first time. But it is beneficial once you become a seasoned 2D, 3D concept artist or a digital sculptor. It becomes really, really handy a little bit later on. And I'll kind of show you how that works, right? So how are we going to get rid of it? Well, what we want to do is delete the 2.5D document in the background. So I have to talk to you a little bit about how ZBrush structures its file management, right? So if we go into the document menu here, right? Oh man, okay, now we see something we recognize. Open, save, save as, import, export. Yeah, that's all stuff that I see everywhere in terms of Windows-based applications, right? But this will not handle my 3D object with the red lines on it. It's not even going to touch it, right? This document, open, save, save as, all that stuff deals with the 2.5D document in the background. The document menu works on the document space here, not this one, right? So I'll show you. I'll pop over here and I'm going to go into my document. I'm going to create a new document or hit Control N. Control N, new document. Whoa, what happened? What happened, right? So what it did was it came in here and said, okay, I'm going to delete this, right? That's what it did. And so all that junk is gone. And I'm just still left with my 3D object floating in 3D space, hovering over top a 2.5D document. Getting confused yet? So I want to save this 3D model. How do I do it? There's nothing up here. Because it's not up there. It's over here under Tool, right? We have Load Tool, Save As, right? Because when Pixelogic first developed the ability to raise that object off the canvas into 3D space, it was meant as a tool for 2D concept and texture artists. Remember that, right? Because ZBrush started, again, as a 2.5D concepting tool, right? So they're like, okay, we can do this. This is cool. Hey guys, we created a new tool for you. We're calling it the Z tool, and it allows you to pull 3D objects up into 3D space. Well, guess what? More people just started using ZBrush strictly for sculpting, right? So they would save tools from here, save as, and you'll get, a window. And the default file format is z.ztl for a Z tool, right? They would load their Z tools. It basically became ZBrush's de facto 3D file format. They just never bothered to rename it or move it, right? Typically, I would have said, hey, it's now the 3D format. Why not move this menu? Call it something like, ZBrush ASCII.za file and move it here in place of the documents menu so that people know how to find it. But they're just like, nah, let's leave it here, right? It's a Z tool, but it's not a tool. It's the actual 3D file format, right? So when you're working with Z tools, you're working with 3D objects, right? So does all of that make sense? I only go through this sort of long, laborious sort of description of ZBrush's beginnings and how it sort of structures itself, because the very first time you pop into ZBrush, you'll just be like, okay, what's happening? Right? And so I want you to understand how ZBrush structures itself, right? So let's hit Control N for a new document, right? Now the cool thing about ZBrush is ZBrush remembers everything you do right up to the last brush stroke, which is really cool, right? So when I bring this in, draw a new object, right? It remembers everything I've done to it. So I've drawn this object, but it is a 2.5D object. Remember, I need to hit Edit to lift it up. Now ZBrush gives you a couple of clues that you're now in 3D mode, right? It draws a nice little frame around your screen, puts 3D guy up here, and gives you coordinates, right? The XYZ kind of axis icon thing, and a little, that was there already, right? So now we know we're in 3D space. So let's talk a little bit about the properties of the 3D object itself, right? Let's talk a little bit about navigation. So navigation is kind of interesting as well, right? And will probably frustrate you, well, guaranteed frustrate you in the beginning, right? So unlike any other 3D application on the planet that has zoom, rotate, pan, right? In ZBrush, you hold Alt left click to pan, just left click to rotate around. You hold Alt left click, but keeping the left click pressed, just let go of Alt and you're zooming in and out. Let me do that again. Left mouse to rotate, Alt left mouse button to pan. Keeping both fingers pressed down, only lift your finger off the Alt key and now you're zooming. So what they've done is they've effectively gotten rid of one key press. And it seems small and it was frustrating at first. But that removal of one key press made it faster to navigate around the 3D object in ZBrush than in any other 3D package I've ever experienced, right? And it's so good for when you're like right in the creative fugue state of sculpting and you're whipping around your model. It just makes it awesome just to get in and out, right? It's very, very clever design, right? So there's that. There's also, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the sculpting tools, right? So I'm just trying to think about where, okay, yeah, so focus will probably be the next thing. So the other thing that ZBrush did that was quite clever in terms of how you focus your camera and find your way around, right? So if I come over here and let's say I draw something there, right? And I hit F, right? Oh, sorry, I need to be sculpting, right? So I'll talk about this in a second, right? So let's say I'm working in this area here, right? And I hit F, right? And I rotate around. It is using that area that I worked on right here as the pivot point. So if I'm sculpting over here, suddenly I'm pivoting around that, right? Which is really cool. It's such a small thing, but it's an understanding of how sculptors like to work. So if I come out here and I'm working in this area here, I'm obviously going to want to focus in on that area and sculpt around there, right? Right? So it's using that as the area of rotation, right? So that's really cool. Yeah. So F to focus, right? And so that'll fill the frame with your object. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the canvas, right? So when I alt click out here on the canvas, that key, that command will have a different effect than if I'm left clicking on the object. So I'll show you. If I left click out here, I'm rotating. If I left click on the object, I'm sculpting, right? So left click on the canvas to move the object around, left click on the object to actually work on it, right? This is important. We'll get to it why it's important in just a second, right? So I'm going to go back up here and talk about these areas here, right? So now we've got our RGB channel and our Z intensity channel, right? And for this, I'm also going to pop back into, I don't need that just yet. So this area here deals with painting on the object, right? So, I can paint in the alpha, but I'll turn on just RGB, right? So here I can come down here and pick a color, right? And then draw on the object. And I can turn down the intensity so it's not so bad, nice and light, right? Now, the brush strokes I'm doing on here are aliased, right? It's really blurry, not very good. Do you guys know why? Give me 1 sec. I'll be right back. Just got to go for a quick comfort break. Okay. Yep, I'm back. Sorry, I just had to duck out for 2 seconds. Dinotopo. Oh, we'll talk about Dinotopo in a second. But Joe, you're right. It has to do with the topology. I'll show you what I mean by getting in there real close and turning on my polyframe, which you can activate down here. I didn't talk about the icons down the right-hand side because they're not important at the moment, right? But I'm going to turn on polyframe. What we're actually doing is referred to as poly painting or vertex painting, right? And to demonstrate this, I'm going to bring the brush size right down. Every vertex has the ability of storing more than just positional information. Every vertex can also hold color data, right? So that's what we're doing. We're painting on the vertex, right? Now, the way vertices store data, pop back over here, is that if we were to look at a vertex here, right? It can store color information, from here all the way up to the midway point, right? So that to a gradient or to a solid fill up to the midway point. So that's what the vertex can hold, right? And we've used vertex painting techniques before in terms of working on PS3 games, PS2 games, right? So it's a completely valid technique in terms of being able to paint our objects, but the resolution is incredibly low, right? This is why we use UV texturing. And what UV texturing basically says, look, ignore the geometry underneath. I've got this texture on a piece of cling film that's really detailed, and I'm going to lay that cling film over top this 3D object. So that's what a texture projection is, right? But with the advent of ZBrush's ability to handle massive amounts of data, I can subdivide this guy up to 2 million polys. And when I come in here now with my brush tool, right? Now I'm getting a really, really, really good line, right? So you can get nice soft gradient on it. I can change the focal shift. When I change the focal shift, I'll get more of a gradient look, or if I bring that focal shift down, I can get a much tighter line, right? The focal shift handles the interior circle of your brush, right? So what's happening here is that now there's enough vertices to be able to hold a high level of painting detail, right? And roughly, I mean, there's a exact calculation for it, but roughly you can consider 2 million polys like a 2K texture, 2048 by 2048 texture. There's enough vertices that we can now, for the first time ever, do highly detailed texture painting directly on the model, right? Directly on the model. We can even do photographic projection painting on the model, and I'll show you all that cool stuff later, right? Okay, so that's the painting tools, but generally we want to be sculpting, which are these tools: Z-Add, Z-Sub, Z-Cut, and Z-Intensity, right? So I'm going to turn on Z-Add, right? So here is where I can start, and I'm just using the standard brush here, right? I can sculpt forms like this, right? Now, you don't need to worry about Z-Sub or Z-Cut because ZBrush adds that functionalities into the hotkeys, right? So with Z-Add, I'm obviously adding to the layer, right? But if I hold down the Alt key, you'll see a little minus appear right in the center of that tool, right? Can you see that minus? When I hit that, now I'm gouging into it, right? And that's fantastic because you're either pulling forms or pushing them down, right? The other hotkey that's available other than Alt is Shift. When I hit Shift, it turns blue, right? So that blue is my smoothing tool, which is automatically attached to my brush. Let me actually bring my subdivisions down a little bit, right? So when I smooth it, it does what it says. It just smooths it all out, right? So just the regular add, Alt will gouge it back down, and Shift will smooth it out, right? Now, you can do the two at the same time, right? So I can turn on RGB, I can turn on Z-Add, and I can sculpt and paint at the same time. I don't know a single artist out there who can do that. I can't really concentrate on that. I find it difficult to do. I'd rather sculpt first and then paint afterwards, right? So I only bring that up because a lot of you may do that as well as a mistake. You'll be like, oh, cool, I'm ready to sculpt. Oh no, what's going on, right? And it's because you've got the RGB turned on at the same time. Now this is a clown model. Yeah, red, white, blue. Okay, and you can see that, again, my pivot point is using where I last worked as the rotation center, right? Okay, so let me go down the tool menu a little bit to that window I just had open, right? And it's this geometry menu. We're gonna skip the subtools for a sec. Right? In the geometry menu, this is where I can control the subdivisions of my model, right? So I'm going to delete all the higher res, just so I can show this to you guys from the beginning. Delete the higher, right? So let's say we got our sphere and we want to divide it. Well, we can click the divide button here, or the hotkey Control D, right? So I can go Control D, and I've gone up to 32,000, and then 130,000, and then 520,000, right? And it keeps track of all the subdivision levels in here, right? So you can move back and forth up and down the line, right? So how is this important? Well, when you're looking at the smooth tool, check this out, right? So if I come in and I sculpt a few things and maybe Alt gouge a few things down, if I want to smooth, I'm trying to smooth this. Look, nothing's happening. Nothing is happening, right? If I go down a subdivision level, oh, it works a bit better. If I go down, it's working really super fast, right? Because the calculations for smoothing are so intense, they're per vertex based. The higher your resolution, the less effective the smooth tool is, right? So that's an important concept to get your head around, because there are some tools that are per vertex based inside of ZBrush. So they may act much more powerfully at a lower subdivision level, right? I don't know, colors of models in the viewport. The color like this can help to sculpt. Yeah, sometimes it can help to sculpt. Sometimes. I just prefer separating the two. It's just my preference. I like to model my character first, then go in and paint it, right? So it really depends. You can try it. I haven't met a single artist who does it. I'm sure there are some artists out there that have tried it, but it's just my preferred workflow, right? Now, let's get to another problem that we run into, right? So let's say you zoom in and you want to do a little bit of work, you know, super up close, right? So we've got like a high subdivision level and you're just sculpting, right? Maybe you're doing some detail work, right? So Alt navigates you, right? How do I navigate out of this? If I hold down Alt, I'm just sculpting on my model. Do you see what happened? I zoomed right in, so the model fills the whole screen. I can't click on anything without causing damage to my model, right? Two things you can do. You can hit the F key to frame your object, and boom, you pop right back out again, right? But another thing that you can do is you can use these tools down the side. The scroll and the zoom deal with your viewport, not your object. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit the zoom and I'm going to zoom out, right? So this is actually taking my view space and moving. I haven't actually zoomed in or out of the model, right? So why would I do this? So that I can show a little bit of the border. On the border here, if I left and click, Alt left click on the border, now I've got my pan, zoom, and scroll functionality back, right? So this little border I like to have in place just in case I need it. Now you can, again, always just hit F, right? But just in case, it's nice to have that border. Let's just say I want to I'm doing something very specific here and I don't want to hit the F key. I just want to zoom out slowly, right? Just a little bit further and then do more work. And then just a little bit further and do more work, right? Something like that. So having that canvas there is really, really helpful, right? And so same with the scroll, it doesn't scroll the object at all. You see what it's doing? It's just moving my viewport, right? So that's that down the side. Let's talk a little bit about perspective. To do that, I'm going to turn on the grid. Actually, I'm going to drop my object and hit Control N. So I came out of edit. Oh, let me walk you guys through that. So what I did was I was in edit mode with my 3D object and I just turned off the edit object and it's saying, okay, you're going to switch from 3D to 2.5D mode. Are you okay with that? Yeah, no problem. Switch it. Now we're looking at the 2.5D mode and hit Control N to get a new document, right? So I'm going to bring in a cube now. So I'm going to hit my space bar, come up to where my 3D objects are, and I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to draw it in here, and then I'm going to drop it into 3D space, right? And I'm going to move my color to white so it's a white object, right? So going down the line, I'm going to turn on the floor so we can see the grid, right? Which is there it is. It's really light grid. Let me go to my preferences. Is it under interface? Trying to remember how to change the gradient in my ZBrush interface. But there we go, the grid is there. I wanted to turn on the grid for a reason, to talk a little bit about perspective versus orthographic view, right? So notice how the perspective is weird, right? It's really kind of wonky, right? If we hit the perspective view, now it looks more like a cube, right? So what is the difference between perspective and orthographic views? Do you guys know? This is kind of important. Orthographic doesn't exist, yes. So if I turn off perspective, I've got orthographic view. So why does every 3D program on the planet have an orthographic view? Looks like an optical illusion. Okay, so what orthographic view is doing is it's removing as much as possible the perspective information, right, in terms of depth, to make the object as flat as possible, which helps with texture projection. It's not to make it easier to make things well, it's easier for projection, right? So when I'm projecting a texture, let me use this as an example. Let's say I've got this box and I want to project. Let's say this is my texture, it's nice and flat, right? I got this box and I want to project this. Let me use something that's a little bit more flat. So let's say we got this flat object, that's our projection, and we want to project onto our 3D object. It's not going to fit, is it? right? It's going to bend and warp around it. But if I were to take this and do something like that, right? Remove as much perspective as possible. When I project, the image is going to land on the side of that nice and evenly, right? So with perspective, it makes working with projections a lot more difficult. By going into orthographic, you are looking at a flattened version, slightly flattened version of your 3D geometry, and it helps support projecting textures on and projecting other things onto your object, right? So knowing that, which view should we model in, perspective or orthographic? Which view do we want to model in? This is kind of important, right? So let me, don't autosave. Don't autosave. You're right, right? You're right. We don't want to model in orthographic, right? But when we're computer modeling, do we want to model in orthographic? Let me go back out of this. Let's get the... So in real life, we want to be sculpting. There's no orthographic when we're sculpting, right? But when we're in the computer, it's a completely different thing, isn't it? No, I don't want to save changes. Let's take a look. Okay, so this and this look like two completely different people. Two very completely different people. So your answer to whether or not you model orthographic or perspective is hugely important. It's massively important. Because if you model in this view and it gets rendered in that view, it's going to look radically different, guys. Oh, is my camera the wrong way around? Okay, hang on a sec. Oh yeah, this IVCam does that all the time. The minute an advertisement pops up, it just does that. Oh, come on, man. There we go. Right? Okay. So, but you can see this screen projection, right? For my ZBrush window. Well, I'm assuming so, because you guys are answering properly, right? So come on, guys. Are we modeling this character or that character? Which character are we modeling? They're like two totally different people, right? Look at this guy, right? Different from that guy. Which view do you model in? Which view? So why the ortho view? This is hugely important, guys. Because what I model here will be radically different from what ends up this way. Doesn't take into account the lens. Do you need to take into account the lens? You're kind of around the ballpark, but wrong. Yeah, you want to change your camera perspective to the normal one. You want to model in perspective. Because the camera lens that ZBrush presents in the perspective view is the closest to the human eye. Right? The closest to the human eye. So our judgment of proportion as it recedes into depth, right, is accurate. You texture in orthographic. I say that, but I do all my modeling and texturing and everything in perspective view, right? The only time I ever go into an orthographic view is if I have to project something. So here's what I mean, right? Look how in the perspective view, right? We can see his trapezius muscle here, but then on the other side it's slightly hidden, right? But then when I go to orthographic view, I see more of the trapezius because it's removing the perspective, and I can just beam a flat plane at it and know that I'm going to be hitting more of the model. So having said that, remember, perspective view is what you want to model in because the lens is closest to the human eye. So what is the lens? What is the lens? Yeah, what is it? What's the size? What's the size of the lens? It's a first class honors question. Some of you are Googling it, are you? Nope, it's not whatever you make it. The human eye is set to a particular type of lens. Between 50 to 60 mil lens, if you were to replace the human eye with a camera lens. So the accepted convention is to model at a 55 mil lens, the closest to the human eye. Right? So yeah, a lot of stuff to absorb there, right? But it's all important stuff. Don't worry if it just, you're tired and it's all going by you, because I will talk about this, over and over and over again, right? So that's the kind of the basics of working inside a ZBrush, right? Just the basic theory of it, right? So what I'll do is I'll run you through real quickly how you would work with this inside of Maya, right? So I'm going to close Photoshop. I don't think I need it anymore. Oh, not the live boolean, right? So do I have, no, I don't have Maya open. So I'm going to pop open a real quick instance of Maya. And we'll talk a little bit about it. Now, I've been dying to teach you guys ZBrush, but it sort of requires that you guys have access to a license. So I really want you guys to send Joel an email and get sorted as soon as possible. Because no matter what I lecture to you guys, unlike Maya, right? I can lecture you guys in Maya. You can kind of get it. You can jump in, you might forget a few things, but you'll sort of figure it out, right? Yeah, you can go help your dad with the shopping. It's cool. I'm going to wrap up in 10 minutes anyway. But with ZBrush, guys, you can listen to any number of theory lectures, but because the way it navigates is so different from anything else, there's no replacement for getting in there and just practicing, right? Honestly, it's going to take you a long time to kind of get used to the way ZBrush operates. Now, by contrast, the sculpting tools in Blender are very similar to the sculpting tools in Mudbox. You can get inside Blender or get inside Mudbox and within 2 weeks be sculpting, right? So if Mudbox and Blender are easier to jump into and start sculpting, why teach ZBrush? Well, because ZBrush is complicated but powerful. And to be honest, if you were to join my team, if I were still in the studio and you're joining my team, I wouldn't worry if you didn't know how to use Mudbox. I'd give you like a week to ramp up in the Mudbox. You'd get it inside of a day, I'd imagine. And away you go. So why teach it at the university level, right? So I'd rather teach ZBrush. It's much more complicated. But if you hit a studio and they have a ZBrush sculpting pipeline, you'll be able to hit the ground running, right? And it's not like it's complicated technically. It's just difficult to get used to, right? Okay, so why am I, actually, let me turn off where's the slideshow? Screensaver. Let's turn the screensaver off for a second. As much as I enjoy it, right? So here's how we typically work inside of Maya and ZBrush. We use a tool that's built into ZBrush, where if you launch it from ZBrush, it'll set it up automatically for you inside of Maya, and it's called GoZ, right? So I'll show you how GoZ works, right? So I don't know if I've gotten it set up in here, but I'll walk you guys through it. So if you're in ZBrush, open up an instance of Maya, and we'll hit GoZ. So GoZ will say, look, we're going to try to automatically detect GoZ enabled applications for you. So I'm going to say, yeah, continue. It goes through everything. 3D Studio Max, it's not going to find it. It'll try to look through everything. I don't know if they've recently added Blender. Probably not, considering Blender may be a competitor for them. So this is basically what it does once you hit GoZ inside of ZBrush. Right? It says not installed, right? So that's cool. Click not installed. It goes and it looks for it's probably found it. I think it's found the next sort of thing. Yeah, it has. So it'll go through all the different tools and ask you which one's installed, and then it'll find it in the directory structure, and you just click on it. This has just found my Maya, so it's just sent it over to Maya, right? So Maya's still doing its weirdly long preload. So I'm just going to wait for it to finish doing its thing. What GoZ does is it'll take my model and send it over to Maya for me, right? And that's what it's currently doing. No, it's still working something out. Cutting it close. I want to end on this by showing you another utility inside of Maya as well, right? So as it's doing its thing, again, in Studio, I would generally have two monitors up. One would have ZBrush and the other would have Maya. And I'd go Z back and forth between the two. Just trying to sort out a live demo for you guys. Maya just seems to take longer and longer to open these days. It's pretty crazy. Come on, man. Craziness. Oh, that's what's happening. My GoZ found my copy of Cinema 4D. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm going to turn off Cinema 4D. So you can see the GoZ compatibility is built in for a number of different applications. You can use it with something called Houdini, but it takes a little bit of jiggery pokery to get it sorted out. There we go, right? So it works for Cinema 4D. Whoa, right? So again, Cinema 4D is just another 3D application that's gained popularity in the visual effects industry, right? So let's close out of that. It's got a nice UI though. Okay, so I do have my Go ZBrush set up here. So I'm going to click on the Go Z button. And okay, so I need to redefine my Go Z path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my preferences and go to where I've got Go Z in my preferences. Here. And I'm going to say path to Maya. And I'm going to tell it where my Maya is because I want to send it to Maya, right? So this is what you would see in the beginning when you click on Go Z. It'll scan through all these 3D applications. It'll give you this window. I've just manually opened it, right? And so it's pointing to my 2019. I'm saying, no, can you install this for 2020? And it'll go through, close Maya. And I'll install this, but I have a feeling my Maya pre-flight check will take forever. But that's basically it in concept, right? So what you do is you can send your model to Cinema 4D or Maya or what have you, make some changes in Maya, click a button, and it'll update in ZBrush. And you work away in ZBrush, you click a button, boom, it'll update in Maya, right? So you can connect the two pieces of software and have them working simultaneously. Because sometimes you want to take your model and use some Maya tools to make some refinements. Maybe there's something in ZBrush that doesn't quite work for you, right? Then you can send it back to ZBrush. Let's say you try some sculpting in Maya and you're like, this is annoying. So you send it back to ZBrush that's got far superior sculpting tools, and then you do more sculpting there, right? And this idea of working back and forth, I'm trying to introduce you guys to in terms of Maya and ZBrush. But it is the de facto standard for working with two or more packages. The process is generally called bridging. So I can bridge an asset from Maya to Substance Painter, to Maya to Mari. You can go from Mari bridge to Nuke, right? The bridging happens all the time in the industry, right? And it allows an artist to work flexibly between two, maybe three pieces of software, right? So if you guys join the course thinking that you would learn Maya and you'd be able to create everything entirely in Maya, that's partially true, but you have to get comfortable with the idea of working with at least two pieces of software open at once, and ZBrush is a good start, right? So I've got my Go Z here. Now, hopefully, with the path redefined, all I need to do is click this guy, and it should be sending it over to Maya, I hope. If it opens Cinema 4D again, I'll call it for today, and then I'll sit down. Ah, man, okay. So it's opening Cinema 4D again, right? So I'll leave it at that and figure out why my Maya connection is not defaulting and picking up those changes straight away. That's really strange. Oh, it might have something to do with, I did some Cinema 4D experiments a little while ago. Well, anyway, the idea is that I could come in here and make some changes and then send them straight over to ZBrush. That's the idea, right? So there's not much that we talked about in terms of concept art or visual studies today. We didn't do any life drawing either, right? But today's session was more about introducing you guys to the theory of working with a 3D package. Now, what I wanted to do was get this guy moved over into Maya so we'd have a 3D object. I'm just gonna fake it for now because we're running out of time. I'm just gonna put, not a cube. I'm gonna come down here and put down a sphere, right? We'll come in here, grab that cube, delete it, right? And I'm gonna right click, go to vertex mode, hit the B key, and we'll grab vertex. There we go. Okay, so let's say we've got our sculpted object from ZBrush. Come over this way. Let's just pretend, guys. And here is Maya's version of grease pencil. So for those of you who've used the Blender version of grease pencil, you'll find this woefully inadequate. But there we go. So you can bring objects in and you can add a grease pencil frame, right? And you can come in here and you can draw changes, right? You can say, you know what? Can you put a nostril in there? And we'll maybe put the guy's eyes down here, right? And then you can give yourself sort of kind of visual feedback and notes in terms of what you want to do, right? Using the grease pencil tool. So I can add grease pencil frames to as many different frames in the timeline as I need. It was generally created as an animation tool, right? So an animator could pre-plan their animations by adding another key and saying, okay, maybe in this one, he starts to smile a bit, etc., and maybe his pupils shift over a little, right? So you can do some pre-planning of your animation as you sort of work with your character, right? So that's basically what I wanted to get to. I wanted to move this character over and then just do some really, really quick grease pencil drawings. We got a very limited palette, but we got a few different tools that we can use. Pencil, marker, pen, right? Eraser tool, and we can choose our color as well, right? So we can come in here and we can just darken a few lines, sketch on our character, etc., right? There's ghosting, but we don't need to kind of worry about that at this stage, right? So generally what I kind of require from you guys in later courses, like in the second year or third year, is that you've planned out your animation inside a grease pencil and got that working a little bit, right? Okay, so that's that. So there you go. In a nutshell, this was a massive introduction to ZBrush. We started off trying to explore the Blender grease pencil tool. I will save that for later on this afternoon. I'm sort of itching to jump in and do a little bit more concepting anyway, so that's going to be quite fun to explore. And that's basically it. Visual Studies is one of the only opportunities I have to introduce you guys to ZBrush and digital sculpting. So we'll probably kind of build on that, a little bit of back and forth between drawing, sculpting, and life drawing as we approach the end of term. So any questions about that at all? It's a weird feeling for me when I get derailed from my original kind of lecture and then I have to jump into something else and lecture you guys on the fly a bit. But there we go. Hopefully you found ZBrush kind of interesting. Once you get used to ZBrush, it's a massively powerful tool, right? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions drop into the chat. Couple of notes again, right? Make sure you contact Joel sometime today because we need to get you guys access to software ASAP, right? Questions about Mac compatibility, you'll have to ask them as well because the RDP software that downloads, that's a Windows only thing. I know that for a fact. So I'm not sure if they're going to be supplying Mac versions of RDP. I know you can manually set it up. Joel might walk you guys through that if you have a Mac. Yeah, life drawings can be anything. If you want, I'd like to see some nudes mixed in with, studies from life. And if that's the case, you just need to go to the Masters Academy. It's not CG Masters Academy. It's something else. No, it's you'll be using, I'm just calling up the window now. You'll be using what I used in the first couple of lectures about life drawing. So it's not that hard to find at all, right? I'll post this in our chat so you guys have it. My faffing about with different high-end pieces of software, I think, has slowed all of my windows down. Yeah, let me... Okay, so That's the one you want. You want the New Masters Academy life drawing sessions, right? I wonder what else they have, actually. They probably have stuff other than life drawing videos. Might be interesting to investigate. Because they are a YouTube art school. Ooh, interesting. That's pretty cool. Okay, so you've got a whole series of life drawing poses. Some new models. It looks like models are up, right? So I just expect you guys to use that, right? There's no other, I don't want you doing life drawing any other way. Don't even think about attending a live life drawing model session. I don't think they're holding them because of COVID. Just use this resource, New Masters Academy, right? And you'll be fine. Okay, so I'm gonna kill the stream here. I want you guys to stay on Discord for just a sec, but for this particular stream, we'll jump into it later. It wasn't really a lot to do with concept art.